Hello everyone. In today's video we're going to take a look at the different types of radios you have available on an airplane. Now keep in mind this is not going to be an incredibly exhaustive, unbelievably extensive kind of list of all the different options that you're going to have. It's just going to be kind of walking you through so you have a general idea of the kind of different strategies that you're going to use involving them. Let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, we're flying here. This is we just took off from Newark. We're heading to New York City proper here. Just get a good look at the skyline. Again, I appreciate the frame rate improvements that we've gotten in some of the recent patches at a cost of some of the terrain, but hey, you can't win them all, right? So let's go ahead and take a look. So basically on a regular aircraft, you're going to have two different sets of radios at the very minimum, hopefully. Of course, if you're flying something out of the 1940s, like a Cessna 140, you might not have any radios or even lights for that matter. So it's actually kind of interesting how that happens. So basically, we have two different categories. We have navigation radios, and we have what they call communication radios. Some aircraft have some pretty fancy frequencies, but as a general rule, most voice communications, especially in general aviation and commercial aviation, is going to be handled way down here in the VHF band between 118 all the way up to, I believe, is 137 basically cycles. So if you want to think about that as another way, we actually are missing a bunch of these decimal points because these are actually millions of frequencies and millions of hertz. And we just kind of read it like this to make our lives a little bit more sane. So the way that they work is pretty straightforward. All you're going to do is you're going to pick the frequency, load in the frequency, and then when you press the transmit button, you go ahead and broadcast out onto that. I know you're sitting there going, well, that's pretty straightforward, but what about all the other things? Well, let's take a look at it. All radio systems typically, unless it's a very old system, have two different types of frequencies. You have the current active frequency, and then you have the current standby frequency. Like as you can see right now, my active frequency is 124.850. My standby is 124.850. Go figure, right? So let's go ahead and change this just for fun. We'll do a 118 just to mix around a little bit. And we'll bring in 118.00. So now this is the frequency I'm talking and listening to. This is the frequency that I want to use. Now if I want to swap these two, I just bop that button, and now I'm talking and listening on this frequency, and this frequency is now in the standby. Generally, when we're flying in the real world, whatever's in the standby is going to be the next person we need to talk to. So if we're coming into a landing, for example, back at JFK, we'd probably have something in here. This would be my tower frequency, this would be my ground frequency, or this would be my approach frequency, and this would be my tower frequency. That usually works pretty well. The other piece we have here, of course, underneath here is a lot of times we'll have a second communication radio. Now, there's a lot of different things you can do with that second communication radio. In the real world, I almost exclusively use it for the purposes of listening to the different ATIS stations around us. So for example, if we wanted to just take an advantage of that, go ahead and I'll bring up a sky vector chart real quickly. Again, great website for these kind of things. Pop this down for a second. Since we're way down here, let's see who we can pick up as far as ATIS goes. So let's see, 115.4 is impossible. We can't actually hit that frequency. It's a little too low for us. But 128.725, that sounds pretty good. Let's give that a try. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this button in to switch to this radio. Go to 128. Check that frequency one more time. I don't want to be wrong about this because that'd be pretty embarrassing. And we'll go down to 725. Perfect. So now I'm going to go ahead and press this button and load that frequency, which is the ATIS frequency, into, or ATIS, however you'd like to call it, AWOS, into this. Now you're noticing there's no sound coming from the radio. The reason for that is because most radio systems have what they call a comm panel, or like a mic control panel, that gives us the ability to turn on and off the audio as well as the transmission on individual radio systems. Like if you take a look now up at the tip top, you can see I'm talking on communication 1 and I'm listening to communication 2. If I wanted to listen to my comm 2, I'd have to come over here and press the comm 2 button. Now when I press that button, that's going to turn on the audio. But note, I'm still talking on COM 1, I'm just listening on COM 2. Now the neat thing here is if you actually look, you can see instantly that all this ATIS information is now rolling in. Now notice, by the way, in Flight Sim, if I click between these two, it's going to change what microphone I'm speaking on, so don't accidentally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to COM 1 and shut off COM 2. Now let's say I've got my weather, I'm super happy with it. Now what's so cool about this is I can leave both of these on at the same time if I want to listen. Theoretically, if you had a COM 3, you could even do that. You could hit the telephone if you want. But again, do what's going to work best for you. Like I said, I like to use COM 2 just for the purposes of listening to ATIS because COM 1 is kind of the primary get stuff busy. Now, if you're an airliner or you travel really long distances, the really popular frequency to leave in there if you have nothing else to do is 121.50. The reason for that, of course, is because that's the international distress frequency. Chances are if something's going wrong, you probably want to be the first person to hear it, so just kind of leave that on there like that when you're just kind of tooling around. The next radios we're going to take a look at are going to be the navigation radios. These are going to be the ones responsible for tuning into ILSs, localizers, VORs, LDAs, everything under the sun. The nice thing about this particular platform on a G1000 is it's actually going to tell you the identifier for you. But believe it or not, sometimes you have to actually identify it yourself. So this is where it's going to get kind of interesting for us. So let's go ahead and bring up my little sky vector again here. And what we're going to do is we're going to find a VOR station. We're going to show you how you can use the radio to listen to a VOR. Keep in mind, some VORs will actually read you the weather, which I think is pretty wild. Here we go. 115.9ers JFK. So right around the corner, so we'll try that out. So I'm going to come over here. Notice it's got its own knob. We're going to go 115.9er. 115.9er. And again, this works the same way. The one on the right is the one you're listening to. The one on the left is the one that you're basically standby. To bop the button, give it a second, and you'll notice it automatically identified. You can't do that in all airplanes. This is a kind of a spoiled airplane that you can even begin that step. Now that this has been done, we can actually listen to the frequency of that, not frequency, we can listen to the Morse code identifier of that station. Since we're in nav 1, we can come over here, and there's actually a button for it. This is nav 1. When I press this button, I expect to be able to hear the Morse code coming from it so that I can identify it. So you're probably sitting here going, well, what's the code? Well, the code's actually right here. You can see we have a dot, dash, 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 dot, dot, dash, 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 dot, dash. So that's what we're going to be listening for when we pop it over. Let's try it out. That's disappointing. Interesting. So normally what that would do is it would play the actual identifier. In the real world, you don't get beeps. You actually get a little... And that's about as loud as that gets. It's pretty irritating, but it works pretty well. At the very least, we're able to still identify it. Now, like I said, in some places, they'll actually read you the weather on that frequency so you can listen into it as well. So other options we have, of course, is you'll notice there's a separate box here for DME. So because of the way this aircraft is set up, we can actually dial in a DME that, unfortunately, we can't do it on this one. I take it back. The ability to select the DME other than the 2 navigation frequencies, and you can actually change that down here. And you could turn that on to just listen to the DME. I mean, you could theoretically do something like that if you wanted to, and listen to both of those at the same time. Now, you also notice there's a button here that's going to say ADF. The purpose of this is if you want to listen to any NDBs. It works exactly the same as these. Well, mostly works exactly the same. But again, that will work as well. And the aux button, by the way, in the real plane lets you listen to the radio if you want to, if you plugged it into the actual box here. But again, if you listen to the radio, what are you not paying attention to? The last one we're going to take a look at as far as all my different radio options goes is going to be the ability to listen to the marker. So what the marker is if you've ever approached on a runway landing and you hear the beep, 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 beep kind of a thing, that's simply the marker telling you that you're crossing a specific point. You know, if we were to rip back over to Newark real quickly, you could actually hear that beeping. And if that beeping annoys you, you could always press the mute button there. All right, so what we've done here is we've got ourselves all nice and neatly established on the ILS here. So we're going to go flip on the marker, shut the marker mute off. Hear it? Now, if we wanted to get rid of that, we could just bop that button and it would mute it out. Press it again and you'd be able to hear it. We can tell that we're getting the outer marker because you got this little O that's lit up right now. That's what that beeping sound actually is. And like I said, if you want to get rid of it, you can hit that. The high sensitivity button, the purpose of that is basically to boost up how sensitive you should be to that particular sound as we're approaching. Now, you're probably going, it's getting annoying, make it go, and it goes away. So that's basically the purposes of that particular button. There's a couple other options in here that we can play with. In the real world, we have the ability to basically isolate people. And a lot of times, too, we have the big old volume knob, so we can turn the audio up and down on the different communications as well. Every aircraft is going to have a fairly similar system and setup to this. Now, if you're all in GA land, basically all the radios I've mentioned are the ones you're going to use. For those of you in airliner land, don't be surprised if you're going to see 2 other kinds of radios. HF, which is a high-frequency radio. We don't even begin to have the capability for that in this particular airplane. Or you'll also run into a UHF if you're in a military aircraft, which is ultra-high frequency, but it's not anything that you need to worry about too much. Other than that, hopefully that kind of clarifies some questions as far as what to do with this. At the end of the day, use the radios the way they make most sense for you in your particular workflow. I just thought it would be a little bit helpful to kind of see how you can kind of bounce around. By the way, if you need to bounce between these two, you can just push in on this particular knob. Each aircraft is going to kind of have its own personality as far as how to bounce between those 2 frequencies, but at the very least, you kind of have a general idea how to do it. Enjoy.